Hey everybody, welcome back to Run and Gun. I'm JT and we are both here to talk about the Panasonic LUMIX GH6. This is a cool little camera. I'm going to share with you guys the specs, the pros and the cons, but really we're both here to see the photo and video examples from the GH6. So let's get those specs out of the way so we can get to the good stuff. So the Panasonic GH6 was released in the first quarter, I believe February of 2022. It's about a year old now. I purchased this camera back in August of 2022. So again, I've had it for 6 or 8 months now. And let's go over the specs real quick of this camera. First and foremost, there is a new 25 megapixel sensor with the Venus engine that Panasonic really brags about. In addition to that 25 megapixels, there's also a 100 megapixel handheld stitch mode or high resolution mode where your sensor takes a bunch of different images and stitches them together into a 100 megapixel super high res image. I've used that quite a few times. It's been super useful. I'll show some examples of that here in a minute. But let's also talk about some of the new video features. The Panasonic GH6 features 5.7K at up to 60 frames per second, which is crazy. It also has the capability of shooting 4K at 120 frames per second. Now, those are 10-bit, which allows you that extra color data to do color grading with, which is some of the huge reasons why I bought the GH6. In addition to that, all of this is internal recording. You have the option of doing Apple ProRes 422 internal recording. So again, higher quality video and more color data. You also have Vlog built right into this camera. So it's not a separate purchase like with the GH5. Panasonic also brags that the GH6 has 13 plus stops of dynamic range when you're using the dynamic range boost mode. I'm not 100% sure if that's true or not. I don't think I've seen 13 plus stops of dynamic range, but it technically may be true. The GH6 also shoots up to 300 frames per second in full HD or 1920 by 1080. Not something I personally use, but you may find that useful for your own video production. So one of the other reasons that the GH6 was a contender for me is because the dual IS or image stabilization. It has 5-axis image stabilization. That means your sensor is correcting for your shake, and also the lens, if you have a LUMIX lens, that's also correcting. So you have two elements working together, your sensor and your lens working together for that dual image stabilization. And supposedly it's up to 7.5 stops. That means you can slow your shutter down, get an extra 7.5 stops of light. And last but not least, with one of the firmware upgrades that Panasonic recently updated for the GH6, you can record to these fun little solid state drives. So if you have a portable SSD drive, this is a Samsung T5. I will give you guys links in the description down below to where you can get yours, but you can record straight out of the GH6 via USB 3 or USB-C, and you can record directly from your GH6 to your solid state drive. That is awesome because this thing is 2 terabytes. It's extremely fast, and I can record my ProRes footage directly to this, plug this in my Mac, and just start editing. I don't have to worry about transferring, using card readers. This is super handy. So all of those specs are awesome, right? Especially for the price point. Back in the summer of 2022, I picked this up for just under 2,000 US dollars. Now it's down to under 1,500 USD. You can find that link in the description down below. Amazon has a really good sale going right now. Again, for under $1,500, there's a lot of awesome features, and that pretty much makes this like the best run and gun photo or cinema camera, right? Well, there are some cons to the GH6 that I think you guys should know about so you can make a fully informed decision before dropping that much money on a new camera. So let's touch on some of the cons of the GH6. Now, first and foremost, autofocus. Everyone loves to rag on Panasonic when it comes to autofocus. They've pretty much become synonymous with slow and kind of crummy autofocus. Now, I will say the GH6 is a big upgrade to the GH5, but it's still nothing to brag about. There are a lot of Sony, Nikon, and Canon cameras of a comparable kind of line at comparable prices that have much better autofocus. Better than GH5, but still nothing to brag about. There's a lot of work that Panasonic needs to do, and I will say that they did release the phase detection autofocus in the S5 II and the S5 IIX, but I'm very disappointed that the phase detect autofocus was not in the GH6. I don't typically use it for video at all, but when I am shooting photo on the GH6, I do wish the autofocus was a little snappier, especially in lower light conditions. Now let's talk about photo. This is a micro four thirds sensor. It's not a full frame. I absolutely don't judge anyone by the size of their sensor. You can absolutely take fantastic, phenomenal photos on a micro four thirds sensor. That being said, a full frame sensor will allow you to take some photos in lower light. The low light performance on this guy for photo is not amazing. It's nothing to brag about. It is a decent sized 25 megapixel sensor, which is a lot bigger than a lot of the other cameras out there. There are a lot of Sonys out there that only have a 12 megapixel sensor, and 25 is way more than you'll ever need for Instagram, for example, posting your little 1.2 megapixel photos on Instagram. 25 is plenty, more is typically better. But I will say there's a lot of noise, especially when you start cranking up your ISO when it comes to photo performance. And I wish the noise performance was a little bit better with this new sensor, as Panasonic says. So overall, when it comes to photo, I will still pick up my Nikon Z6 over my GH6. I think the photos are much better. I think the low light and the noise performance is much better in the Nikon Z6, even though it is an older camera released back in 2019, I believe. I just wish, again, that there was better lower light performance and better noise or internal noise reduction when it came to the Panasonic GH6. Now let's talk about video on the GH6. Video is about 99.9% of the reason why I bought this camera. 5.7K at 60 frames per second, 4K at 120 frames per second. That is absolutely phenomenal, right? Well, there are some cons to the video that I think you guys should be aware of before potentially purchasing a GH6. So when it comes to color grading and using different LUTs on your footage, I love to shoot vlog. Shooting log kind of feels like you get that little bit of extra dynamic range and extra availability to do color grading, and I love using it. The only downside to using vlog is when you're shooting high noise, like low light situations where your shadows get super noisy, or anything after dark. Vlog really just seems to fall apart. And that's not necessarily a vlog issue. That's been an issue in the GH5 as well. It's really just kind of that low light performance of the GH6. Now I've seen some people that shoot with a neutral natural color profile or Cine-like D, and you can get better noise performance out of that. But vlog really kind of stinks when it comes to low light video production and low light video shooting. So I like shooting a lot of low light things. For example, my neon portraits. I love getting behind the scenes video, especially 4K 120. I have done some testing, and shooting vlog kind of falls apart when you start doing low light things, especially neon portraits. They're very bright neon signs, but then on the other hand, you have these kind of dark shadows to balance it out. So you'll start to see with vlog, you'll see noise, especially when you have to start cranking your ISO up, and any sort of like noise in the shadows just gets kind of mushy and crunchy, and I don't really love it. So be careful when shooting vlog. I have seen in lower light scenarios, people like to shoot neutral or natural color profiles, or they'll shoot on a Cine-like D profile to get a little bit better noise performance. Also, when it comes to noise, I mentioned before the GH6 has that dynamic range boost function. That means if you turn that on, your minimum ISO is 2000, which to me, I think that's ridiculous. You can shoot kind of like dual ISOs. I think it uses a 2000 ISO for the shadows and a lower ISO for the highlights and merges those together. I'm not 100% sure how that works, but shooting at a 2000 ISO value, that's ridiculous for me, and that's something I don't even want to mess with, so I really don't play with that dynamic range boost function. As cool as it sounds, it kind of feels a little more like a marketing gimmick to me. I wish Panasonic would do a little bit more work on that. And lastly, but probably one of the biggest cons to the GH6 when it comes to video, is this weird horizontal banding that for some reason shows up in video, especially high contrast environments. Let's say you have a window and you have window light coming in, nice sunlight, and you have the dark edge of the window. You'll see these horizontal bands that have something to do with the contrast. Very light scenes or very light parts of your image against very dark parts of your image. You'll see this horizontal banding. And even when you add contrast to Vlog, for example, this banding still shows up, and I absolutely hate it. I've contacted LUMIX about this, and when they get back to me, they pretend like it's not a problem they've ever heard of before. It's very strange. They have to know this exists. It's in all sorts of reviews, and I just wish that Panasonic would come up with some sort of either firmware fix or some sort of fix for this banding, because it's really frustrating to say the least. So let's talk about the actual design of the GH6. Fits in your hand pretty well, extremely similar, almost a mirror image of the GH5. We've just added an extra little function button up here. We've added this record button, some little red accents that are cinematic, like these cine cams. Now, I don't love this record button on the front. However you want to shoot, it's kind of awkward to get to, so I don't love it. If that wasn't there, it wouldn't hurt my feelings. We have moved this record button back, so now I can reach it with my thumb if I want to, and I'm not confusing it with this other button that was up here on the GH5, but primarily for recording, I'm just gonna hit the shutter button because that starts and stops recording. Sometimes I'll hit the red button. Sometimes if I'm filming myself, for example, I will push the red button. Then I'm always kind of worried, did I really hit record? Did it, start recording? So don't love that. I won't necessarily call it a design flaw. It's just kind of in a weird spot, I guess. It's supposed to be more like a video camera, but again, it's weird when, what, So those are the biggest pain points of the LUMIX GH6. I want to give you guys, my honest opinion, but let's take a look at the photo and video, because I'm sure that's what you've all been waiting for. And be sure to make your decision after checking out some photo and video examples from this pretty cool little camera. So after looking at that photo and video example, I will say that the GH6 has a lot to offer, especially for that under $1,500 price point. There are some pros and cons to weigh. You have to decide whether you're shooting photo, video, a little bit of both. Are you buying this for video production, a studio camera? Just some things to think about. And if you are thinking about buying the LUMIX GH6, I would highly recommend buying the higher quality LUMIX or Panasonic glass. That's the Summilux lenses. I'll have links to those down in the description below. They're very sharp. Do not buy the kit lens. I hate this lens. I pretty much regret buying this lens every day of my life. This is the 12-35 LUMIX G Vario lens. I do not love this. This is not sharp. It gives me muddy looking footage, and I absolutely don't think I'm getting the best quality out of my sensor. The bokeh is crap. The sharpness is crap. This lens is crap. Not worth it. Spend the extra money to get the most out of your sensor, to get the cleanest image. And again, those Summilux lenses, I've tried them out, and the footage is very sharp. Your footage and your photos will be tack sharp. Now, what I personally use is this fun little photo deox adapter, and this goes from Nikon F mount to micro four thirds, so I can put all of my Nikon F glass on the GH6, and I throw a 50mm 1.4 on here, it turns it into a 100mm. I throw my 14-24, that turns it into a 28-48, just about 50mm. Awesome lens. If I throw a 70-200 on here, it turns it into a 140-400, 2.8, that's crazy. And again, I can just adjust my aperture on here, and I absolutely love this little adapter. Pretty cheap from Photo Deox. If you'd like one, again, I can drop that down in the description below. But this is what I personally use for getting great quality photo and video out of the GH6. So this is my little cinema setup. In addition, I have a whole bunch of little pieces that I've made, kind of my own run and gun GH6 cinema rig. I'm going to do a whole video dedicated to that so you guys can see some of the little parts, the cage parts, the rails, the matte box, all the little additional things that I've turned this into kind of the perfect little run and gun rig for me, at least. I've also been working on another video where I've taken this $1,500 GH6 and I've pitted it up against a like $15,000 to $25,000 Red Epic with a Mysterium X sensor. I used Nikon lenses on both, and I shot some awesome 4K 120 on both cameras. And what I want to do, if you guys are interested, let me know down below in the comments. I'm going to edit all of that together, and I'm going to see if you guys can tell the difference. Once it's color graded, once it's uploaded to YouTube, can you tell the difference between a massively expensive Hollywood camera and little baby GH6? I think that would be interested. So again, let me know down below in the comments if that's something that you guys are interested in seeing with that comparison. So that's really all for the GH6. Those are the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the GH6. So if you found this video helpful, which I hope you did, please let me know down below in the comments, give this video a like, and if you want to see those future videos, be sure to subscribe, turn on your notifications so YouTube is telling you when I actually drop a video, and I'll show you guys some more content with the GH6. So thank you guys for watching, and until next time, get out and go shoot.